No, no! Whoa!
I've known of Jeremy Vine for many years, but he came to my particular attention again recently when somebody pointed out one of his cycling videos to me, and that is what I want to discuss today. Jeremy Vine, the cyclist. He's known for getting himself into incidents as a cyclist, which he captures on camera and then shows on social media. Indeed, in early September this year, Mail Online noted that up to that point, Jeremy Vine had been involved in not less than 27 cycling incidents that he had uploaded to his Twitter account. I looked recently at one of his clips, which shows an incident in Bloomsbury. I'll show you the footage first.
No, no! Whoa! Are you okay, sir? Just come over here. Wow.
If we now go back through the incident, we can see Jeremy Vine approaching the junction on his bike. We can see ahead that we have no entry signs and Jeremy Vine is in a cycle lane, so he's about to enter a street that is one way for vehicular traffic but allows two-way bike traffic. There's a red light there on the left, but that's not relevant to Jeremy Vine. It's actually pointing towards the street on the right that's emerging into the junction. You'll see the road markings indicate that as Jeremy crosses the junction, he enters a junction box, a no waiting box, marked in yellow, so he does have to make progress. The driver of the van is making a pretty bad error. He wanted to make a right turn, but should have entered the junction box and in order to do that, so he should have continued straight on into the junction itself in order to make his right turn. Instead, he assumes that the cycle lane to his right is available to him and turns onto it, which puts him in the opposing direction to oncoming cycles and other traffic. To reinforce what a bad error this was, take a look here at his vantage point at the junction and you'll see the blue mandatory direction signs, which he's either ignored or not seen or maybe not even understood. You can also see them up close here from a shot I've taken from immediately after the incident. His mistake means he will inevitably have to stop and either back up into the junction or pull out. Jeremy Vine has obviously noticed the mistake and is making a big fuss about it, but it's not clear whether the mistake actually directly affects him. That's a question that we'll come on to in a moment. Jeremy's choices in this situation are that he can either just continue on his way across the junction and onto the cycle lane at the other side and leave the driver to remedy his own mistake, or he could just stop in this small area just before the van, which I've indicated by the red arrow. Some people who've seen the footage believe it shows Jeremy Vine slowed and stopped in the van driver's blind spot, but I don't believe that's the case. I think what happens here is that Jeremy does slow down, but that's because he has to, as he has to allow for the possibility that a cyclist could emerge from the road that the driver is turning into. Remember that the driver is turning into oncoming traffic. However, what you'll also notice is that as Jeremy passes behind the rear offside corner of the van, his handlebars turn into the left, which does suggest a possibility, let me stress, only a possibility, that he intended to go round the near side of the van and remonstrate with the driver rather than continue round and pass the van without stopping. The whole sides and rears of any van or lorry are a massive danger area to be avoided, especially if the driver of the vehicle has already demonstrated that he may not have good judgment. And as you've seen, the major drama in the incident starts when the driver realises his mistake and then reverses, and at this point Jeremy got off his bike, which went under the van. He then banged on the back of the van to alert the driver. To be fair to the driver, those of us who have driven in large cities with the multiple lanes and the confusing road markings know how easy it is even for a careful driver to make a mistake like that. And to be fair, the mandatory blue signs that tell him he has to go straight ahead and into the junction box rather than turn right up the cycle lane are fairly small and could be missed. Nevertheless, I think he did commit driving offences. He could have been summoned for driving without due care and attention, known as careless driving, contrary to Section 3 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, and for the offence of disobeying road markings, contrary to Section 36 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. The driver was clearly at fault for his mistake, and his mistake was not the fault of Jeremy Vine, and clearly the van driver must bear the majority of blame here for his poor observation, both in making an illegal turn that put him contrary to traffic flow, and in reversing without careful observation. However, I also think that Jeremy Vine shows fault in this incident, not least with reference to the highway code, which I will be mentioning a lot in this video, because it ought to be read by Jeremy Vine, as well as most of the drivers he encounters, of course. I should say at the outset something about the legal status of the highway code. Some of the rules in the highway code are legal requirements, and if you disobey them, you're committing a criminal offence. Such rules are identified by the use of the words must, must not. In addition, the rule includes an abbreviated reference to the legislation which creates the offence. However, it's important to understand that the rule itself is not the law, so when a prosecution occurs, the individual is prosecuted not under the highway code itself, but under whatever is the corresponding statutory provision or common law offence. Failure to comply with the other rules of the highway code will not in itself cause a person to be prosecuted, because those rules are advisory, but legally the highway code may be considered supporting evidence in any court proceedings, whether civil or criminal, to establish liability. This includes rules which use advisory wording such as should not, do not. Going back to the incident we're discussing, an important concept to bear in mind in this and other incidents I will cover here is what is called the hierarchy of road users, which forms part of the highway code and is known informally as the H rules of the code. The introduction to the H rules explains the hierarchy of road users as follows. The hierarchy of road users is a concept that places those road users most at risk in the event of a collision at the top of the hierarchy. The hierarchy does not remove the need for everyone to behave responsibly. The road users most likely to be injured in the event of a collision are pedestrians, cyclists, horse riders and motorcyclists, with children, older adults and disabled people being more at risk. The following H rules clarify this concept. Rule H1 states this: it is important that all road users are aware of the highway code, are considerate to other road users and understand their responsibility for the safety of others. Everyone suffers when road collisions occur, whether they are physically injured or not, but those in charge of vehicles that can cause the greatest harm in the event of a collision bear the greatest responsibility to take care and reduce the danger they pose to others. This principle applies most strongly to drivers of large goods and passenger vehicles, vans, minibuses, cars, taxis and motorcycles. Cyclists, horse riders and drivers of horse-drawn vehicles likewise have a responsibility to reduce danger to pedestrians. None of this detracts from the responsibility of all road users, including pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders, to have regard for their own and other road users' safety. In this incident we're looking at, the van driver has the greater responsibility in this situation. Whether the driver was actually at fault in regard to Jeremy Vine, the cyclist, essentially boils down to whether the driver infringed Rule H3 of the Highway Code, which I will read. Rule H3 states, you should not cut across cyclists, horse riders or horse-drawn vehicles going ahead when you are turning into or out of a junction or changing direction or lane, just as you would not turn across the path of another motor vehicle. This applies whether they are using a cycle lane, a cycle track or riding ahead on the road, and you should give way to them. Do not turn at a junction if to do so would cause a cyclist, horse rider or horse-drawn vehicle going straight ahead to stop or swerve. You should stop and wait for a safe gap in the flow of cyclists if necessary. This includes when cyclists are approaching, passing or moving off from a junction, moving past or waiting alongside stationary or slow-moving traffic, travelling round a roundabout. Now the question is, did the van driver cause Jeremy to stop or slow? That's the question that Rule H3 should raise in our minds when discussing Jeremy's culpability in the incident overall. I'm going to treat this as a legal question. That means we ask whether Jeremy himself observed the relevant parts of the Highway Code. Rule 74 of the Highway Code states, turning. When approaching a junction on the left, watch out for vehicles turning in front of you, out of or into the side road. Jeremy Vine should know that he may have to allow for people turning at junctions. Rule 76 of the Highway Code states, take great care when deciding whether it is safe to pass stationary or slow-moving lorries and other long vehicles, especially at the approach to junctions, as their drivers may not be able to see you. Rule 147 states this, be considerate, be careful of and considerate towards all types of road users, especially those requiring extra care. Try to be understanding if other road users cause problems. They may be inexperienced or not know the area well. Be patient, remember that anyone can make a mistake. Do not allow yourself to become agitated or involved if someone is behaving badly on the road. This will only make the situation worse. Pull over, calm down, and when you feel relaxed, continue your journey. Slow down and hold back if a road user pulls out into your path at a junction. Allow them to get clear. Do not overreact by driving too close behind or intimidate them. What Rules 74, 76 and 147 of the Highway Code are telling us are the expectations on both the driver and Jeremy Vine. I'm not convinced Jeremy Vine fulfilled his side of it, and I don't believe the van driver caused him to slow or stop if that is what he did. I think Jeremy Vine made too much of the incident, and I also think he was at fault in not anticipating the van's next move. He should have held back in this area just prior to the van that I indicate again here, rather than entering the van driver's blind side. But is it mere fault as a cyclist, or is there something deeper going on with Jeremy Vine? Did Jeremy Vine engineer the incident with the driver on purpose so that he would have video content for his Twitter account? If you think I'm perhaps laying it on a bit thick about Jeremy Vine, I will tell you there's a pattern of behaviour of this kind on his part. Before I explain what I think that pattern is, let's watch another incident that unfolds in a very similar way, with a van turning right this time.
No, 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 no! MD. Jesus. Wow. No, 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 no!
Let me just stress that all the graphics that you see in this footage is Jeremy Vine's, not mine. The driver is indicating, and he is in the junction before Jeremy Vine reaches it, and he makes a turn that he is entitled to make. I think the point that Jeremy Vine may be trying to make is that the driver should have given way to Jeremy, the cyclist, but why should he when he has already made the junction? It makes no sense. It does very much look to me like Jeremy is trying to create an issue when there isn't one. Furthermore, he does make what is, in my opinion, a rather dangerous manoeuvre around the van at the end. Anyway, here's another Jeremy Vine clip.
What the hell? Jeez, do you watch the cycle lane? Yeah. You want to apologise at all?
Yeah, sorry mate.
Thanks.
I do see what the driver did wrong there. He definitely should have given way. But I also think Jeremy Vine is at fault in that he either shows poor awareness of the road or just pretends to make a big deal of it for his Twitter content. If we watch it back, Jeremy Vine is some distance behind the driver and we can see the driver clearly indicate to turn left. It's possible that at some point Jeremy is in the driver's blind spot. The left turn inevitably involves crossing the cycle lane. The driver has no alternative but to do that. Rule 140 of the Highway Code applies and it states, you should give way to any cyclists in a cycle lane, including when they are approaching from behind you. Do not cut across them when you're turning or when you're changing lane. Be prepared to stop and wait for a safe gap in the flow of cyclists before crossing the cycle lane. The driver should have given way, and he did cause Jeremy Vine to slow down. We see that in the footage, but I think Jeremy Vine makes more of it than he needs to. Jeremy Vine should have seen the driver indicating good time, and should have adjusted his cycling accordingly, and we can see that he has plenty of opportunity to slow and stop if necessary. Just because the driver is at fault, that does not relieve Jeremy Vine of his own responsibility to deal with the situation as it is. A skillful and experienced cyclist would not need to stop, could have slowed down in sufficient time and then continued on his way. But in any event, the driver's mistake should not have caused Jeremy Vine too much trouble. He chooses to make a big deal out of it. I think Jeremy should also read Rule 147 of the Highway Code. Let's read it again. Be considerate. Be careful of and considerate towards all types of road users, especially those requiring extra care. Try to be understanding if other road users cause problems. They may be inexperienced or not know the area well. Be patient. Remember that anyone can make a mistake. Do not allow yourself to become agitated or involved if someone is behaving badly on the road. This will only make the situation worse. Pull over, calm down, and when you feel relaxed, continue your journey. Slow down and hold back if a road user pulls out into your path at a junction. Allow them to get clear. Do not overreact by driving too close behind to intimidate them. Here's an incident where it's hard to pick fault with the driver. In fact, it's Jeremy Vine himself who seems to be the one at fault.
You're not going left here. You're not going left. Jeez.
Again, needless to say, any graphics or text that you see in the footage that from Jeremy Vine that I show in this video is by Jeremy Vine, not by myself. I think the criticism here of the driver is that he indicates an intention to make a left turn very late. He may even have started to turn slightly before indicating, but what you also notice is that the brake lights came on quite early. I just don't think the driver does anything significantly wrong in this specific situation. The fault is actually with the cyclist Jeremy Vine, in my opinion. The driver indicated braking, and what the footage tells us is that the cyclist Jeremy was too near the back of him, couldn't stop safely, or rather didn't stop for effect, and dangerously veered into a side street without indicating. I ought to mention at this point that there is an offence of careless cycling on the statute book. It's section 29 of the Road Traffic Act 1988, which states, if a person rides a cycle on a road without due care and attention, or without reasonable consideration for other persons using the road, he is guilty of an offence. Here's yet another instance in which it's hard to pick fault with the driver, and indeed Jeremy Vine seems to be the one who provokes it. Jeremy hogs the middle of the road as usual, but the main point he seems to be making is that the van driver makes an early left turn down a rat run rather than waiting to go left at the main junction, and then ends up where he started while Jeremy continues along. I think Jeremy has misunderstood the road signs on that street. You can clearly see that there is a no right turn sign. That explains the decision of the van driver. It's clear that he was intending to turn right all along and had to turn left in order to loop round and cross that junction. Here's another incident for you to consider.
That's not good. That's not good.
What do you want, Mike?
Yeah, you do a close.
You doing fuck off.
You do a close pass on me. Wait, SF67. You
I
don't.
know my law. You can rap on me 20 times. Okay?
You're so dangerous. Try listening.
You can see that the van driver obeys the arrows and moves to his left. In this situation, the driver could have been more considerate, though he had little choice but to obey the road markings. Jeremy Vine should have anticipated that the driver would do this and could have behaved a little bit more pragmatically. Instead, he turns the incident into an argument. The pattern I see in these incidents involving Jeremy Vine is that whether or not the driver is at technical fault, Jeremy Vine shows terrible roadcraft in that he's very reactive in the way he deals with incidents, and this frequently worsens incidents and gets him into confrontations and trouble with drivers. It could be that he just lacks the ability to anticipate emergent hazards on the road. Here's a recent clip that gives credence to that explanation.
It doesn't matter how bad your driving is. If you're a nice guy, you'll never have a problem with me.
No! Jeez. Wow.
My apologies, I couldn't
Don't
see.
worry, mate. It's fine. Have a good one.
You too, man. What happened to your arm?
For somebody who cycles every day in a busy city, Jeremy does show some very poor anticipation skills in that clip. It's not like he cycles round a sleepy village or something like that. He should be used to that sort of situation. I'm not even certain that the driver is at fault there, because he does only reverse by a small distance before Jeremy gets his attention. If Jeremy were further back and not in his blind spot, it would not have been an issue. It seems to me that there's also a general unwillingness on Jeremy's part to be more pragmatic on the road. Take this example.
There's no entry, and the people who watch it most. Whoa, my God! Gotta be on my camera. Whoa! My God! Gotta be on my camera. You be on my camera, mate. You be on my camera. It was a close pass. I'm really sorry. I have to give it to the police. I'm really sorry. You get points for it. Yeah. You can't drive that close.
20 witnesses.
I mean, have a look. Have a look. Really?
Speed always leaves a smile on your face.
Like, are we really inconveniencing him that much?
While there's no specific offence of close passing, it is true that a driver can be prosecuted for a close pass. Typically it would be a prosecution for careless driving contrary to Section 3 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. Here's what the Highway Code says about overtaking and cyclists riding two abreast. First, Rule 163. Overtake only when it is safe and legal to do so. You should not get too close to the vehicle you intend to overtake. Move quickly past the vehicle you are overtaking once you have started to overtake. Allow plenty of room. Move back to the left as soon as you can, but do not cut in. Give motorcyclists, cyclists and horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles at least as much room as you would when overtaking a car. As a guide, leave at least 1.5 metres when overtaking cyclists at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, and give them more space when overtaking at higher speeds. You should wait behind the motorcyclist, cyclist, horse rider, horse-drawn vehicle or pedestrian and not overtake if it is unsafe or not possible to meet these clearances. Rule 212 says, give motorcyclists, cyclists, horse riders, horse-drawn vehicles and pedestrians walking in the road, for example when there's no pavement, at least as much room as you would when overtaking a car. Rule 213 says, on narrow sections of road, on quiet roads or streets, at road junctions and in slower moving traffic, cyclists may sometimes ride in the centre of a lane rather than towards the side of a road. It can be safer for groups of cyclists to ride two abreast in these situations. Allow them to do so for their own safety, to ensure they can see and be seen. Cyclists are also advised to ride at least a door's width or 1 metre from parked cars for their own safety. I'm not convinced the driver's close pass here amounted to careless driving. In my opinion, the fault was on Jeremy Vine. Rules 163, 212 and 213 are advisory. They don't say that the cyclist should ride two abreast in a given situation, only that it may be considered safer to do so in some situations. But the cyclist has to take into account the situation he faces. Jeremy insisted on cycling two abreast along a road, knowing there would be an impatient driver behind him. While drivers should try not to be impatient in their driving, sometimes impatience is not an incorrigible attribute of a bad driver. It can actually be a rational response to someone else's behaviour. In this case, I think it could be. Jeremy could have adjusted to the situation he faced and left the driver some room to pass, knowing that the driver had already seen him. Again, here Jeremy should have regard to the Highway Code, in particular Rule 66, which states this: you should be considerate of the needs of other road users when riding in groups. You can ride two abreast and it can be safer to do so, particularly in larger groups or when accompanying children or less experienced riders. Be aware of drivers behind you and allow them to overtake, for example by moving into single file or stopping, when you feel it is safe to let them do so. We should also look again at Rule 147 of the Highway Code, which among other things states this: be considerate, be careful of and considerate towards all types of road users, especially those requiring extra care. I do wonder how knowledgeable Jeremy really is of the Highway Code. Take this clip as an example.
Being safe on a bike is all about understanding the mind of the driver. The truck is illegally parked in a cycle lane. But driver psychology helps me here. The police car will make him careful, and he'll be more aware of bicycles because he knows he parked dangerously. So watch me get proved right.
Oh! Sorry.
Oh, for God's sake.
No! Oh! Sorry.
Obviously the driver is at fault there for not checking the mirror, but that footage is again a classic example of Jeremy Vine's one-eyedness, in that he seems blind to his own faults as a cyclist. Jeremy is clearly in the wrong there too, because he's cycling too close to the van. Rule 67 of the Highway Code states, you should take care when passing parked vehicles, leaving enough room, a door's width or 1 metre, to avoid being hit if a car door is opened, and watch out for pedestrians stepping into your path. Jeremy's behaviour may be a result of some sort of animosity towards drivers and a desire to remonstrate with them and feel morally superior. I do only speculate though. Jeremy says he's also a driver, which I'm sure is true, but he does have an agenda against drivers, who he calls petrosexuals. There may also be a deeper layer to it, a desire for video content that serves some sort of underlying psychological need he has for attention. I think an aspect of it is that he has a need to appeal to stances that he thinks will be popular. in certain circles. For instance, he has something against people who drive big cars around cities.
X11TUN.
Seems like a thing for a lot of cyclists, the idea being that the streets in central London can be quite narrow and the cars take up a lot of room and are unsafe. But it seems a bit irrational to me because London is full of large vehicles, buses for one thing. Jeremy doesn't have any principled objection to buses, only to people who drive 4x4s. Could that be because the people who drive 4x4s are wealthy and therefore successful people? Maybe often will be quite arrogant people as a result and drive in a certain way that cyclists don't like. Therefore he has an agenda against them, but not against buses and bus drivers who, if anything, could be more dangerous and inconsiderate and obnoxious to cyclists. It's clear from some of the footage that he even follows some drivers and tries to catch them out in a similar way to how an auditor might behave.
You're on your phone, yeah? You're on your phone. You can't be on your phone, ma'am. No. It's a red light. You're just checking what?
To be clear, those people are breaking the law, and I don't condone that at all. But I don't particularly like people such as Jeremy Vine who snoop around and tell tales like he's doing there and in other footage he puts out. It's not just drivers that Jeremy seems to have it in for, though. Sometimes pedestrians get on his bad side. An incident occurred earlier this year in which Jeremy in effect caused an Amazon delivery worker to lose his job. I'll show you now what happened. One annoying thing about the way he puts these clips together is the graphics. It's very distracting. I do wonder if the distraction is on purpose sometimes, so that we don't consider important details that Jeremy might not want us to notice.
This is the cycle lane here.
Prick.
You want me?
Prick.
Why?
Just to be clear, I don't agree with the actions of a pedestrian. It's not good to shout abuse at people in the street like that. However, I don't accept that the pedestrian lied. I also don't accept Jeremy Vine's criticism of the driver. I think the driver in that clip did absolutely nothing wrong. I'm going to freeze the footage here at the point that the pedestrian notices Jeremy Vine, and I'm going to point out some things that Jeremy Vine might not want you to consider. First, we can see this is a busy junction. The cycle lane is demarcated by that broken line, and the driver will have no choice but to straddle the cycle lane at points. Jeremy Vine will know this, and he saw the van driver pull across the cycle lane in good time. Jeremy claims that the driver must give way, but I would dispute that contention. This is another one for Rule 140 of the Highway Code, which I read out earlier. We'll read it again. It states this to drivers. You should give way to any cyclists in a cycle lane, including when they are approaching from behind you. Do not cut across them when you are turning or when you are changing lane. Be prepared to stop and wait for a safe gap in the flow of cyclists before crossing the cycle lane. There was a safe gap in the traffic and the driver took it. He has to make progress. He can't just sit there all day. We see that in the footage. I think Jeremy Vine is talking nonsense. The question is, was Jeremy Vine endangered due to the actions of the driver? I think the answer is no. Jeremy Vine was certainly endangered, but due to his own actions, in that instead of waiting or dismounting and walking across that road, he decided to cycle across the front of a van without even alerting the driver to his presence. Rule 76 of the Highway Code gives this advice to cyclists about going straight ahead in this type of situation. Going straight ahead. If you are going straight ahead at a junction, you have priority over traffic waiting to turn into or out of the side road unless road signs or markings indicate otherwise. Check that you can proceed safely, particularly when approaching junctions on the left alongside stationary or slow-moving traffic. Watch out for drivers intending to turn across your path. Remember, the driver ahead may not be able to see you, so bear in mind your speed and position in the road. To me, Jeremy's manoeuvre here is dangerous for three reasons. First, because the van might not have seen him before pulling out. Second, because a car in the road behind Jeremy Vine might not have anticipated his manoeuvre and there could have been a collision as a result. And third, because Jeremy Vine is assuming that the car just behind the near side of the van has seen him and won't try to emerge, and he also can't see any pedestrians or cyclists approaching, also emerging on the near side of that van. On that note, the advice in Rule 76 about watching out for drivers intending to cut across your path surely applies as much to the risk of pedestrians cutting across, having not seen a cyclist. Here's Jeremy Vine's explanation for why he went round the front of a van. I think I'm going to read this out. Thanks, mate. If I may, the reason I go in front is to try to show the van politely that he has broken the highway code. I was within sight when he blocked the lane. I just want him to know that. I do understand that some drivers will pull across a cycle lane and sit there because when they have made the move initially, no cyclist was visible. That's not something I get cross about, but this guy could see me. I think this gives further support to my general view of Jeremy Vine as a road user. The driver did not actually breach the highway code, of course, but putting that aside, it's not the job of Jeremy Vine to show other road users that they've broken the highway code. Rule 77 of the highway code tells us what Jeremy should have done in this situation. Busy roads. When crossing faster or busy main roads, you may find it safer and easier to dismount and push your cycle across. Wait for a safe gap in the traffic before doing so, especially on faster roads and dual carriageways. He should have waited for the van, or he should have dismounted, or both. He should not have gone in front of the van, putting a pedestrian at risk and other road users at risk as well as himself. The point is that a good driver has to do what's right for the situation actually in front of him, and that also applies to cyclists. And in this case, the best answer in that situation was to wait and let the van go. Turning to the pedestrian, he's vulnerable in that situation because the van is blocking his view of the oncoming traffic and Jeremy Vine is cycling directly towards him. We should bear in mind again the hierarchy of road users in the highway code. What appears to have happened is that the pedestrian has checked beyond the white van that there's no traffic coming, but didn't expect Jeremy Vine to come round to the van's near side. I think that explains his annoyance with Jeremy Vine. That and probably just a general dislike of Jeremy Vine anyway. This hostility towards Jeremy is a result of Jeremy's behaviour. Feeling obliged to educate other road users about their mistakes is a habit a lot of cyclists and motorists seem to have, and I've noticed that we have on the road a minority of driver and cyclists too who feel the need to act up whenever they notice a mistake by anyone. I think it's a bad outlook and attitude. It rarely has the desired effect, assuming the aim is to improve road skills, and I suspect it's often just people making the most of a perceived moral high ground. It frequently just makes things worse. What is the right approach when you see another road user driving or cycling badly and making mistakes? There are several facets to good cycling, which is what we're dealing with here, and that are relevant and that perhaps Jeremy Vine may wish to take note of. Defensive cycling, anticipation and planning, being seen or visibility. To me, defensive cycling means more than just being careful. It involves assuming the worst of other road users and adjusting your cycling accordingly so that your cycling allows for the mistakes and fallibilities of others. To cycle defensively means that you expect anything and anticipate negligence. This can be both proactive and reactive. Proactive defensive measures could include staying out of blind spots, watching people's heads when they're looking, anticipating possible escape routes, and maintaining situational awareness by looking ahead and looking around. One way to sum all that up would be ride as if you're invisible. Proactive defensive cycling can include sometimes being assertive or even aggressive by controlling the traffic and taking up space in the middle of a road or lane. This may be necessary in some situations for safety purposes, as we've discussed earlier, in order to ensure that you're visible to drivers. Reactive defensive riding for a cyclist may mean pulling in to let impatient drivers pass, moving to the left to avoid a dangerous overtake from an oncoming driver, and making other allowances. Anticipation and planning skills are obviously linked to defensive cycling and develop with experience. Anticipation skills help you to take action in response to an emergent hazard, be it a pothole or a dangerous driver. Another sign of good anticipation is to always select the right road position for the situation, which in turn allows for good anticipation of hazards and situations ahead. Planning is a consequence of anticipation in that it involves navigating a route through a situation that minimises the chances of being affected by emergent hazards. For example, if you see someone make a stupid mistake on the road, your reaction could be to slow down and keep away from them, as they will usually make another one soon after. The most important aspect of visibility for cyclists, other than having lights and wearing high visibility clothing, is to ensure that you are always in a position that you can be seen by the driver. In the incident near Tavistock Square that we discussed earlier, Jeremy Vine was in the van driver's blind spot. He could have avoided that by anticipating that the van driver would reverse and by holding back in the area just before the van. If he really needed to make progress past the rear of the van, he could have shouted again or used his bike horn again as he prepared to pass. I think it's relevant here to bring up the national standard for cycle training, sometimes informally referred to as bikeability, especially in regard to the teaching of cycling proficiency for children, but it also has relevance for adults. This has no legal standing, but it does form the national standard for cycle training in Britain, so it's useful for assessing the competence and skills of cyclists. Element 4.1.2 of the National Standard for Cycle Training refers to the following skills a cyclist should have: Anticipate the likely actions of other road users ahead and behind. Give other road users enough time and space to perform their manoeuvres. Monitor and manage your own reactions to other road users. Identify blind spots for drivers of large vehicles in particular, if present. Element 4.2.1 of the national standard lists the anticipation skills needed of a cyclist. Continually scan the riding space ahead and behind, close to the cycle and into the distance. Anticipate possible hazards and prepare to respond to them. Judge the significance of possible hazards and prioritise your response. Respond to hazards effectively. Element 4.2.2 lists these skills. Create and maintain a safe riding distance. Scan the riding space ahead and behind. Position yourself to maximise visibility to other road users. Manage your own physical and emotional state. Ride at such a speed that you can always stop with control. Assess your own riding behaviour and identify areas for improvement. In my opinion, there are two main challenges facing a cyclist. First, planning for the unanticipatable. Some things that happen on the road that put you as a cyclist at risk are just the random idiosyncratic actions of other road users. A common example of a mistake by drivers is a failure to look over their right shoulder so that they miss a blind spot. We've seen one or two of the incidents that may have involved with Jeremy Vine. The second challenge I think cyclists have is emotional management. Cyclists are vulnerable road users like pedestrians, but unlike pedestrians, they use the road itself. They don't have a segregated pavement with the risk of only having to cross the road every now and then. Instead, in most parts of the country outside London, where Jeremy cycles, perhaps even in London itself really, they have to ride on the road itself. And as a result, the cyclist is vulnerable, and it's very hard to contain yourself emotionally when the driver does something that puts you at risk. And this is obviously due to the cyclist's vulnerability on the road. So I can understand why Jeremy Vine, who cycles in a hothouse environment of central London, might develop a certain antagonistic attitude towards drivers. And this may have regressed his knowledge and skills, because instead of looking at himself, he's pointing the finger at others. I accept sometimes with justification, but not always. In most of these clips, he is at least partly at fault, sometimes entirely at fault. But I don't believe the problem with Jeremy Vine is just a lack of skill or poor awareness. I think the motivation for him is a definite anti-car attitude and a desire to wind up motorists and create incidents for attention.
Oh, you're quite a dangerous driver, mate.
You're in the wrong lane.
No,
Why
no,
are you in that
I'm
lane?
not. What? Why do you think you've got a right to go ahead of me just because you're in a car?
You deliberately went in front of me.
No.
In the wrong lane. Get
Sorry.
in the bloody cycle
What
lane.
are you talking about? Why are you driving dangerously?
I drive how I want. You don't own
You
the
don't
road.
dri- sorry. You mean you drive how you want? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
My name's Paul, and you're a
On the face of it, the driver seems to be at fault in that incident for being impatient, and indeed he was at fault for that reason. But Jeremy Vine could have helped avoid aggravating the driver by giving him some room. Jeremy argues that it's a 20 miles per hour zone, so it shouldn't matter, but the way he's riding is likely to wind up and aggravate drivers, and I think he does this intentionally. Let's again remember Rule 147 of the Highway Code, which states, be considerate. Be careful of and considerate towards all types of road users, especially those requiring extra care. Of course, this should also be directed to the driver. I stress again that he is the one at fault. Here's another example of the same attitude from Jeremy Vine.
Because I've got to be a car's width.
Why the fuck would you stop in front of the car? Do you not respect your fucking life? Move your bike, move your bike. Move your bike. No, you stick to it. I could have hit you and I would have been done for murder. Get the fuck out of the road.
Up there. I have to be within a car's width of the parked cars. See up there? So just... So it's because of I've got to be a car's width.
Why the fuck would you stop in front of the car? Do you not respect your fucking life? Move your bike, move your bike. Move your bike. No, you stick to it. I could have hit you and I would have been done for murder. Get the fuck out of the road.
Up there. I had to be within a car's width of the parked cars. You see up there?
Again, it's the same story. The driver is at fault for being impatient, amongst other things, but Jeremy Vine could have avoided a confrontation by simply pulling in and letting her pass. It's courteous and costs him nothing. I can't excuse the driver's behaviour, obviously, and Jeremy Vine is legally in the right, but when she called him an idiot, I must say she does have a point.
So just... Don't assault me. You've already assaulted me. Are you going to hit me?
Take a picture of my car again, I'm going to knock you out because that's my personal belongings. Do you understand?
Okay.
Don't fucking take a picture. Take a picture of my car again, I'm going to knock you out because that's my personal belongings. Do you understand?
Okay.
Don't fucking take a picture.
Okay, don't hit me because that would be an assault, yeah? It would be an assault. Okay?
There's nothing wrong, let me emphasise, with a cyclist asserting his right in the road. Cyclists pay tax just like motorists and are entitled to use the road. But you've also got to be a bit pragmatic, and if it's obvious that you're holding somebody up, whatever the rights or wrongs of that in itself, you ought to pull over and let them pass rather than make them frustrated and angry at you. Here, Jeremy, as well as the driver, should remember Rule 147 of the Highway Code, which states, let me repeat, be considerate. Be careful of and considerate towards all types of road users, especially those requiring extra care. I think the only argument that could be made for Jeremy Vine's activities as a cyclist is that his videos do document why defensive cycling is necessary, due to the dangerous situations that bad driving often creates. Yet he stands his ground and puts himself in harm's way to show us this bad driving. In one sense you could argue that that's admirable. We should also consider Rule 204 of the Highway Code, which reminds us, the road users most at risk from road traffic are pedestrians, in particular children, older adults and disabled people, cyclists, horse riders and motorcyclists. It is particularly important to be aware of children, older adults and disabled people, and learner and inexperienced drivers and riders. In any interaction between road users, those who can cause the greatest harm have the greatest responsibility to reduce the danger or threat they pose to others. So yes, in one sense, as I say, what Jeremy Vine does is admirable, but in another sense it goes against the basics of what is expected of a cyclist. He regularly features on his Twitter account incidents he has on the road, so there must be a certain pressure on him for content. In the process, he has got at least one person jailed, someone else sacked. Jeremy Vine is like a cycling version of a crash test dummy. What is he actually doing? What is he up to? Why is he so accident prone? Is he just an innocent cyclist who's just particularly unlucky? I don't think so. I think in the essentials, Jeremy Vine is doing what auditors do. He's generating content. Getting people into trouble with the law, getting people the sack. The incidents he records are mostly not real. I don't mean to suggest they're staged. This is not a conspiracy theory, but I think he does deliberately provoke most of these incidents. Just as normal interactions between businesses and public photographers are nothing like what auditors show. Similarly, interactions between cyclists and drivers are typically not as shown on Jeremy Vine's Twitter account. It's a spectacle rather than reality. There is a genuine debate behind all this though about the place of cyclists on the road. Really a freeway debate, dominated by two opposing philosophies, which I'll now touch on. The first group are those who favour what's called vehicular cycling. They believe that cyclists have as much right to the road as motor vehicles and oppose things like cycle lanes and other types of separation between cyclists and motor vehicles. One of the early pioneers of this philosophy was a bicycle transportation engineer called John Forrester, who wrote a book called Effective Cycling. In basic terms, vehicular cycling involves requiring cyclists to share the same space as motor vehicles and treating cyclists as any other road user. These people, especially at the more purist end of the position, would generally object to separate infrastructure for cyclists.
Cyclists fare best when they act and are treated as drivers of vehicles.
That's the late John Forrester, whom I've just been discussing. Another prominent proponent of vehicular cycling is John Franklin, author of Cyclecraft, another book. He's well known among cyclists, especially in the UK, for advocating this position quite zealously, and he even argues that cycle lanes can be dangerous for cyclists in some types of situations. At the other end of the spectrum in this debate, you have the cyclists and also a lot of motorists who want a separate infrastructure for cyclists. Again, the purists on this side would want to minimise interaction between cyclists and other road users, especially motor vehicles, with an infrastructure for cyclists that is not just separate from other road users, but entirely apart from them and even autonomous of them. In this group there will be some motorists who think that cyclists should be banned from most roads and required to use their own routes around built-up areas and maybe the countryside as well. More moderate people on this side of the debate may argue for a more hybrid position. The transportation planner and bicycle historian Bruce Epperson calls these two opposing camps the Great Schism. And that schism is still very much alive within cycling, with proponents for cycle lanes saying they are the only way to grow cycling, and some right to the roaders being opposed to any and all supposedly sidelining cycle infrastructure. Then you have the people in the middle who don't hold a principled view one way or the other, and perhaps place greater emphasis on individual road user behaviour and the education of road users, rather than any systemisation of the highway. John Franklin's Cyclecraft, which is based on the vehicular cycling philosophy, forms the basis of the national standards for cycle training, which means that vehicular cycling is the basis for cycle training in the UK. I think this is due to the fact that, in common with most countries, we don't have a comprehensive infrastructure specially for cyclists. I think this is why, gradually over the years, John Forrester's ideas about cycling have become quite influential. For instance, the idea of lane control, in which a cyclist uses the space he needs to be much more conspicuous, as opposed to riding relatively inconspicuously near the road edge. That is now what would be called the primary position in the national standards for cycle training, and it's pretty much conventional thought. The benefit of primary positioning in cycling is that it precludes another driver from passing dangerously close within the same lane, or at least it's supposed to. The flaw with vehicular cycling as a general cycling technique, I think, can be summed up in this quote from a paper by John Puja and Ralph Buehler, Cycling for the Few or for Everyone. In the vehicular cycling model, cyclists must constantly evaluate traffic, looking back, signalling, adjusting lateral position and speed, sometimes blocking a lane and sometimes yielding, always trying to fit into the dance that is traffic. Research shows that most people feel very unsafe engaging in this kind of dance, in which a single mistake could be fatal. Children, as well as many women and elders, are excluded. While some people, especially young men, may find the challenge stimulating, it is stressful and unpleasant for the vast majority. It is no wonder that the model of vehicular cycling, which the USA has followed de facto for the past 40 years, has led to extremely low levels of bicycling use. My own personal view of the role of cycling is none of these philosophies, or rather, you could say it's all of them. I think the solution should be different in different parts of the country, different in different places. I can easily see that in some built-up places, a separate autonomous cycle network would make sense, whereas in others, it would be more sensible to just install and maintain more cycle lanes along existing road routes. And in still other places, it may be best to do nothing about the infrastructure and just encourage education and road safety. For practical purposes, you could say Jeremy Vine is sort of in the middle position of all this, in that he benefits from an ample infrastructure for cyclists, but this takes the form mostly of cycle lanes along roads that require him to merge and share the road with vehicles and pedestrians. Most of the incidents he gets caught up in seem to happen in that shared space, where he has to deal with motorists rather than being ensconced in the relative safety of a cycle lane. In that shared space, he doesn't seem to want to adhere to national cycling standards, or the highway code. He wants to assert the right of a cyclist over the motorist, but even vehicular cycling purists, such as John Franklin and the late John Forrester, both of whom advocated zealously for vehicular cycling, even they believe that cyclists should defer and concede space to motorists, especially at or near junctions. For instance, if crossing at a junction laterally, the junction should give the cyclist should give way to a driver seeking to turn off. John Forrester also argued that when riding in a lane sharing position, cyclists should yield to overtaking traffic using the other part of a lane. None of this is because he thought that cyclists are inferior to motorists, rather it's because it makes sense from the point of view of courtesy and safety when a cyclist is behaving as if he is part of a road and in effect driving his bike. Therefore, it makes sense to defer to the motorists in certain situations. John Franklin believes that cycle lanes present the biggest risk to the cyclist near junctions, and I wonder if Jeremy Vine's footage goes some way to vindicate Franklin, perhaps in a way that Franklin wouldn't expect. The luxury of being able to cycle along a cycle lane has perhaps regressed the cycling skills of Jeremy Vine and other cyclists, especially their ability to anticipate emergent hazards, because they are no longer as used to and as practiced in being part of that shared road space, which they would be if they adopted the vehicular cycling technique fully. Jeremy seems to thoroughly enjoy putting himself in situations where he's likely to end up in a bit of bother and can rant about bad driving. The problem is that this doesn't take account of human fallibility, which all road users should do, and is why anticipation and planning skills matter so much. To go back to the first incident I showed you, the driver realised he had made a mistake and then tried to reverse out of it, not seeing the bike that was trying to squeeze round the back. That's the driver's fault. But Jeremy must realise that London is complex. People don't have the luxury of learning every junction so they can stream on Twitter about it. Believe it or not, all road users are human and make mistakes. What's worse is that Jeremy seems to create issues that don't really warrant making a fuss of. Fanning the flames between cyclists and drivers does not seem a sensible way to go. It's understandable that drivers might get annoyed by cyclists sometimes, moreover, as anyone would be if someone's doing 10 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone and you just want to get home from work and you can't overtake them safely, so you're stuck behind them. My personal view is that cycling and driving are incompatible, and the solution is to remedy the traditional underinvestment in cycling. We still have no proper cycling infrastructure in most of the country, especially in the north of England, but even in London. Zealous cycling advocates may not be helping matters, they may be making the reputation of cyclists worse. They frequently come across as having no empathy for anyone else or wanting unrealistic accommodations to be made specifically for cyclists, while making excuses for poor behaviour by cyclists and refusing to accept any solution that isn't their maximal demand, while considering any car anywhere to be a moral wrong in and of itself. Jeremy is a symptom of that, part of the purity spiral that goes into discussion of these issues where everyone just adopts maximalist positions. His profile on Twitter reflects this with his catch line from a film. It's a line improvised by the American wrestler and actor Roddy Piper in the 1988 John Carpenter film They Live. "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum." I think Jeremy Vine should spend more time reading the highway code.